I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies Video Edition. So, Josh, what is the most environmentally friendly thing you do?
What's the most environmentally friendly thing I do? Well, I'm one of those idiots who has a car in New York City, so that's the opposite of environmentally friendly. Probably shouldn't do that. But I do live in a small apartment, so I think that's reducing my carbon footprint.
Right. Yeah, no, and you did that to reduce your carbon footprint.
Yeah, exactly. That's there. No,
you could have bought a townhouse, but you chose to rent a small apartment.
I think I'm pretty good about recycling, and I try to do like meatless Mondays or once or twice a week do like a meatless day instead of, consuming meat products. And I almost never consume red meat products anymore or like beef products for that reason. Although I do love a good burger or a steak. What about you?
I don't know. I recycle. I'm mostly vegetarian. Also don't eat red meat. I will say we tried composting and then we got the craziest fruit fly problem.
Composting's tough in a small I
want to go back
space.
to it because I know it's important, but also
it's so hard because I know you probably got one of those like compost things that you have in your kitchen. It's supposed to be self-contained.
Really, like, emptying it every day kind of thing, but it still was not working.
Yeah. I try to, so this is always the thing, like I try to limit like food waste too. I cook a lot and like, so I'll try to save any like trimmings of vegetables or meat and freeze them and make like stock out of them or something. But then I just end up collecting things in my freezer.
Yeah, you just have a freezer full of like cucumber peels or whatever. Yeah.
I did, in growing up, and this is not so much me as it is like my parents in the neighborhood, we did have like a neighborhood compost lot that like all of the neighbors, which was awesome. It was right across the street. Yeah, it was great. We would dump our leaves over there or any other like compostable trash and stuff like that. And it was great. And I was just like a kid growing up. I didn't know what composting really was for or anything like that. But looking back on it, and they still do it, actually. I don't know why I'm saying looking back. They still do it. Kind of a pretty cool thing for the neighborhood to do in suburban Rhode Island.
Anyway, we spoke to somebody far more environmentally friendly than both of us.
Clearly we're doing great for the earth.
This week on the podcast, and it's Bill McKibben. He is an author and activist focused on climate change and other environmental issues. He is also the co-founder of international climate organization 350.org and the founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for climate and racial justice. He came on the show to talk about his book, Here Comes the Sun, in which he argues for the potential of solar and wind power to address the climate crisis and help society. We also talked about Bill Gates' recent about-face on climate change and what the billionaire is getting wrong. Here's that conversation. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be with you, yes.
So, before we get to your book, I know you wrote a Substack about this recently, but for our readers, probably one of the bigger pieces of climate news that has come out recently is that Bill Gates recently downgraded climate concerns as an issue of importance. Is he right? What is going on?
It's funny. I've had a checkered relationship with Mr. Gates and climate for some years. I reviewed his last book for the New York Times. He didn't like it, my review, so he complained vociferously in Rolling Stone the next day in a long interview. Look, first thing to understand about Bill Gates is it's not like he's been all over this from the start. As he put it out in his book, it took him till 2006, which was 18 years after Jim Hansen told us that the planet was heating up, for him to conclude that it was actually a real problem and not something that nature was going to solve by itself. Now he's saying, well, let's don't worry any too much about it because we should be working on other things instead. The best interpreter of this letter of his was, of course, the President of the United States, who quite succinctly on Truth Social announced, Bill Gates says climate change is a hoax. It's not quite what he said, but for all intents and purposes, he might as well have. And I'm afraid it's because, Mr. Gates' empire at the moment depends, like all the other billionaires, on sucking up to this guy. Even on his face, his declaration is sad and silly. If you were worried about development in the poor world, Gates released his document the same day that Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica with the highest wind speeds we've ever recorded, 252-mile-an-hour gusts, 600 feet above sea level, the kind of wind speed you can only get when you've dramatically increased the heat content of the ocean by warming the atmosphere. The damage that was done on Jamaica, we don't have a final number yet. We won't for a long time. There's parts of it people still haven't really reached yet. But the insurance industry was estimating that it was between 30% and 250% of Jamaica's annual GDP. So let's transpose that to the United States. That would be at the low end of that estimate, as if Hurricane Katrina, which did $100 billion worth of damage here, had done $9 trillion worth of damage here. The point is, you're not going to have a lot of development in Jamaica anytime soon. At best, you're going to have recovery. The same day that Gates released his report and Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica, we also had what was probably the largest rainstorm ever recorded on the planet. It was over central Vietnam, a developing part of the world, where 5 feet of rain, almost exactly, fell in the course of 24 hours. That could be a lot of development in central Vietnam anytime soon. They're going to have to somehow figure out how to feed themselves after this year's crops were washed away. In fact, landmines left over from the war in Southeast Asia washed right back into where people and farmers and things have to do their stuff now. All in all, it's just a way of saying that Gates is being silly here, especially because the most important tool that we have for rapid development in the developing world, the quick, rapid adoption of solar energy, is also the thing that would be most useful for dealing with the climate. So I'm very glad that my immense fortune doesn't depend on sucking up to the president of the United States, because it allows one to be a little freer with the truth.
So, despite all those, very upsetting statistics or anecdotes you just shared, in the intro to the book, you say that after decades of pessimism, you now see at least some room for optimism in this conversation. Why is that?
Well, because for the 40 years that really climate change has been a live issue, the basic trigonometry of the problem was fossil fuels cheap and renewable energy is expensive. So it's really hard to solve this problem because the same thing that's destroying the planet's climate system is the thing that's driving our economy. We did our best, and we needed to do things to try and raise the price of fossil fuel, carbon pricing, divestment so that their cost of capital would go up, blocking infrastructure so they couldn't consolidate the territorial expansion of the fossil fuel industry. But that was always sailing against the economic wind. About 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and wind and batteries than from burning coal and gas and oil. Just in passing, I'll note that that was the same year that Bill Gates published his last book explaining why there was a huge green premium because it was so expensive to do sun and wind. He managed to miss what was happening. That's a really epochal moment for human civilization. I mean, human beings have been setting things on fire for 700,000 years. Darwin said that language and fire were the two things that set our species apart. But now we don't need the fire anymore. And good because A, fossil fuel is wrecking the climate system. That's the biggest thing humans have ever done by far. B, fossil fuel combustion kills 9 million people a year directly on this planet, about 1 in 5 deaths, just from breathing those particulates that lodge in your lungs. I mean, there are 5 million school children in New Delhi. 2.5 million of them have irreversible lung damage from breathing the air. And C, as long as we depend on fossil fuel, then we're in the pocket of the people who control the small deposits of these resources around the world. The king of Saudi Arabia, great guy. Vladimir Putin, taken his winnings and launched a land war in Europe in the 21st century, the CEO of Exxon. Instead, we now could and are beginning to turn to the large ball of burning gas 93 million miles above our heads that already gives us light and warmth and via photosynthesis our supper, and is now willing to provide us with great gobs of power if we would just take it up on the offer. And that's the good news of this book. That's what's starting to happen around the world. The last 36 months have seen a huge surge in clean energy, the quickest growth in any energy form we've ever seen. We're getting 1/3 more power from the sun this autumn than we were last autumn on this planet.
Wow.
So we're still in the early stages, but we've hit that steep part of the S-curve, and we've got to keep it going. So that's the possibilities. I'll just add, it has to be fast because climate change is a timed test. Once we've melted the Arctic, nobody has a good plan for freezing it back up again, and we're getting way too close to those kind of tipping points.
When you were working on this book, did you also consider, nuclear energy or natural gas, or, you know what I mean? How did you think about that?
Sure. Let's think about all the different things. So natural gas turns out to be just as bad as coal. It produces a lot of CO2 when you burn it, not as much as coal, but on the way to getting it burned, while you're fracking for it, while you're piping it along the continent, while you're shipping it overseas on great tankers, some of it leaks out.
Yeah.
And a methane molecule, CH4, is 80 times better at trapping heat than a CO2 molecule. So it doesn't take much of a leakage to make it worse than coal. And that's what all the most recent data says. So natural gas, no. Nuclear power, I've got no real problem with. Look, everybody knows what the dangers are, but those dangers are considerably smaller than the dangers of overheating the planet, which we're now seeing, on which we've already been discussing. Maybe someday someone will make nuclear power at a price that allows us to do it with some speed and at some scale. So far, we're not there. And it's hard because nuclear power has to compete with the very inexpensive power that you can get from the sun and the wind. And the speed with which you can build those things. If you want to go build yourself a data center and you need a power supply, nuclear power is going to take you some years to do. The Chinese were building 3 gigawatts of solar panels a day in May. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a coal-fired power plant. So they were putting up one of those every 8 hours. This stuff snaps together, man. It's not hard.
So, I want to talk about that. You call solar and wind the Costco of energy in the book because it's inexpensive and available in bulk. And as you just outlined, you can assemble it really quickly. But walk me through the sort of simple math here. Why is heat energy so inefficient compared to work energy?
Well, think about a car. You put gas in a car and you light it on fire. I mean, that's what the spark plug does. And you've got this series of tiny explosions that, in the cylinders with the pistons. At best, about 30% of that energy actually goes to work moving your car down the road.
Mm-hmm.
The other 70% is why you have an exhaust pipe. It's because it's basically producing heat that has to be dispersed. Very, very inefficient. So I have solar panels all over my roof, and they connect basically to the EV in my garage.
Mm-hmm.
That EV has almost no moving parts under the hood, a tenth the ones in an internal combustion engine. And that work energy in that engine is about 80% efficient. About 80% of that power is devoted to moving the car down the road. That's why if you have an EV, even if you attach it to a coal-fired power plant, you're doing way less damage to the environment than driving an internal combustion engine car. But of course, the ideal is to attach it to a solar panel or a wind turbine that doesn't. So, I mean, that's the revolution that's happening here. We can produce electricity cleanly now with the sun and the wind, and we can make use of that electricity to do the things we need to do. So if the holy trinity of electric production is sun, wind, batteries, in your home, the trinity of electricity consumption is EV or e-bike, heat pump instead of furnace, far, far more efficient, quieter, safer, cleaner. And in the kitchen, instead of the open campfire that most of us have, the induction cooktop, available for $60 from Amazon if you shop on Amazon. I'm the cook in my family. I don't pretend to tell you how an induction cooktop works, magnets, but it boils water twice as fast as our gas stove used to, and great chefs around the world are now busily adopting it because it allows for pinpoint control of temperature and so on and so forth. And the point is, none of these things represent sacrifice for anyone.
Yeah.
They're better than the thing that was there before. We talk a lot about the EV. Let's just also, in passing, note what a miracle the e-bike is, because there are actually a lot more people every year buying e-bikes around the world, especially the developing world, than EVs. I mean, a bicycle was good technology to start with, but now there's a bicycle with no hills, and it'll go 5 miles on a penny's worth of electricity. I mean, this is about as good as it's going to get, frankly.
Speaking of, the expense of some of these things, I guess I'm curious, actually, first of all, personally, when did you get solar panels put in, and also how expensive was it at the time? Because in the book, you talk about how it's still kind of expensive in the States compared to other countries.
Other places. Well, when we got them put in, they were really expensive.
Yeah.
I started putting them up 25 years ago. We've got like 3 generations of our roof is a kind of patchwork of different generations of solar panels. But I figured if I wasn't putting them up, who was going to?
Yeah.
And so they work great. As you say, they are more expensive here than they need to be, largely because of excess bureaucracy. That's why they cost 3 times as much in the States as they do in Australia or the EU. Most of the world, if you want solar panel on your roof, you call somebody on Monday and they're there by Friday. They're up there pumping out power. Here, it's a months-long odyssey. We've got 15,000 municipalities. Each has their own building code. They each want to send a team of guys to climb around on your roof and look. All of this is unnecessary. The National Renewable Energies Lab gave us this nifty little tool called the Solar App Plus 2 years ago. A contractor can tap in the address where they're putting up the solar panel and the equipment that they want to put up. And if the computer likes the match, it gives them an instant permit and they get to work up on the roof. So California, Maryland, and now New Jersey have adopted this, which leaves 47 states to go by my rough count. And that's one of the things we're pushing hard to get done at Third Act and elsewhere in the kind of pro-solar movement. When that kind of stuff really takes off, the results are amazing. So, for example, in Australia, they're closing in on 40% of homes with solar panels on the roof. Australia is producing huge amounts of solar power now. On Monday, the government in Australia announced that beginning next year, they have so much solar power in the afternoon that electricity will now be free for all Australians for 3 hours every afternoon.
Wow.
And in that 3 hours, you can set the timer so that your dishwasher runs and your dryer dries your clothes, and you can charge your EV. And if you have a storage battery, you can fill it up with free electricity to power your stuff in the nighttime, and on and on and on. You know, we've talked a lot about affordability and abundance in this country this year. That's what that looks like. You know, that's what abundance looks. Think about that for a minute. I mean, really, I think it's the first time in human history that we've ever had been just able to say to people, here's free power. Go make use of it. See what you can do with it. And given what we know about human beings and human creativity, people will think of all kinds of amazing things to do once they have access to that kind of energy. So that's what can happen if you get your ducks in a row here.
Now, you outline, at the beginning of this interview in the book, it's sort of the premise that we've crossed this invisible line where solar became the cheapest form of energy on Earth. How does this kind of shift the economic argument here? Are you seeing people talking about it in government? Like, what does
in the rest of the world, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what's happening across almost the entire world. I mean, look, this work's being pioneered in China. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are, doing 2/3 of the clean energy installation around the world. And as a result, they're now owning things like the world's auto industry. If you think Detroit is the center of automotive excellence on planet Earth, think again. It's 2 or 3 cities in China whose names I find it hard to pronounce, but that are putting out the best and cheapest cars on Earth by a large margin. If we didn't have huge tariff blockades in the way, these are the cars we'd all be driving now too, because there's no beating them. So yeah, that's what the rest of the world is quickly figuring out. And this is especially good for the 80% of human beings who live in countries that have to import fossil fuel. That when poor countries go into balance of payments crises or have to have the IMF come in and structurally adjust their economies and whatever, it's almost always because, at least in part, they've had to pay huge amounts of foreign reserves, US dollars, in order to get the next tanker load full of oil to keep their economy sputtering along. But now they can go spend their money on Chinese solar panels, at which point they're not dependent on China anymore. They're now dependent on the sun, which, heretofore has come up each morning. So it's a transformative kind of thing.
When we talk about the sort of technological race with China right now, a lot of people talk in terms of AI, generative AI. And obviously, generative AI takes an enormous amount of energy to power. To go back to Bill Gates, obviously, I think some of his fortune is tied into that technology succeeding. How do you think about that in the context of this book?
Sure. So let's stipulate for the moment that we don't really know at the moment how much of that AI hype is bubble and how much is real. And we're probably going to find out over the next few months. And I have some doubts about it. But if you decided that you absolutely had to build lots of data centers very fast in order to stay ahead of China in this race, the easiest way to build them fast would be to use solar and wind to make this happen. And this is, precisely what's not happening right now. At the moment, the Trump administration is all in on building data centers and all out on building cheap energy from the sun and the wind. And the result is you've increased demand, constricted supply, and what do you know? The price is going up. Americans are paying 10% more now for electricity than they did last year, and that's just the beginning. Say you're Microsoft and you want to build a data center and you need power for it. Say you're doing it in Pennsylvania. This team from Rewiring America came up with the numbers to show that the fastest and cheapest way would be to not build anything at all. It would be to go find lots of Pennsylvanians who are now using electric resistance heating, baseboard heating, very inefficient, and just hand them a heat pump and say, use this instead. And that would save so much electricity that you could run the data center on what was left over, and the people with the heat pumps would now be saving lots of money, win-win all around. Instead, Elon Musk has been renting what are essentially jet engines, the dirtiest diesel generators you can possibly imagine, stuffing them into poor neighborhoods of color in Tennessee and running them, round the clock in order to power his grok thing that's, seems to be devoted to explaining why apartheid was a great idea. So the whole way that we're doing this is crazy.
Do you think there's a world where this sort of race to get more data centers up will actually help?
If we were smart,
cause?
We'd be leveraging it to do exactly that. But we're not. I hate to say it, but smart policy does not seem to be distinguishing the U.S. at the moment. A cynical way to look at the AI boom and the Trump administration's involvement with it is, this is one more excuse to try and figure out how to burn more natural gas.
I want to talk a little bit about climate activism. You obviously founded Third Act to organize people over 60. And in the book, you actually say there are two forces slowing the sort of transition to renewables, and those are inertia and vested interest.
Yep.
And I'm curious how climate activism can or should evolve to fight those two things.
So we've talked a little bit about vested interest already, and that's the obvious one. And, we have to win some elections and, that kind of stuff. It would be a lot easier if we didn't have things like Citizens United that allow the rich to toy with our political system. Inertia is also a big force in human affairs. We do things somewhat slowly, sometimes for good economic reasons. It's cheaper to, make transitions slowly. Sometimes everybody listening to this has a refrigerator. If you clean out the dust from beneath the refrigerator, your refrigerator will be 20% more efficient. But
the worst chore, Bill.
Essentially, no one ever does that ever. So you have to figure out ways to overcome that inertia to make it easy and exciting to do the right thing.
Now, you founded Third Act to organize people over 60, and this is actually a demographic that typically has a lot of economic and political power, but can also be kind of resistant to change.
Yep.
Why is this demographic so key to changing the conversation around climate activism?
If you look around for who has structural power, it's really a lot of people with hairlines like mine. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60. We punch above our weight politically because we all vote. There's no known way to stop old people from voting. We have lots of connections after a lifetime, lots of skills, and lots of time. And so it was an obvious thing to try, but as you say, many people said this will never work because people become more conservative as they age, more resistant to change, as you put it. I don't know if that was true always, but I think for this generation of old people, not so true.
Interesting.
If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, it means your first act was in this moment of great cultural, political, social transformation that we call the 1960s, the 1970s. So these are the people who were around when we started taking women seriously in public life. They saw the apex of the civil rights movement. They were there for the first Earth Day in 1970 when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, marched in the biggest demonstrations in American history. These are people who know that change is possible. We have it in our muscle memory, really, our generational DNA. And so it hasn't really surprised me how successful it's been. We've got about 100,000 people now around the country, great working groups in almost every state. They do incredible work of all kinds, lots of very mundane lobbying, letter writing, all of that. Very effective because politicians, as I say, know that these people are going to be at the ballot box. And now, as our democracy begins to flicker and falter, I think it's particularly useful to have older people engaged in this work because the one thing that young people can't understand about Trump is how completely abnormal he is, how unlike every other president that's come before. But that's what's so striking to those of us who've been around for 15 presidents. There's been plenty that I didn't like, but there were none that I thought there was none of them who were going to put out a video where they get in an airplane and fly across America dumping poop on the heads of Americans, It's like, what is this? This is craziness. And somehow older people are better situated to say that sometimes.
That makes a lot of sense. My last question for you is related to Third Way and some of the arguments in your book, which is, what are some of the big sort of legislative things that you want to see passed?
So at the moment, the things that we can get done are state and local. And those are the kind of things that I've been describing. And we need states and localities doing all that they can. And there's a lot that states can do. And there's a number of states that are doing, cap and dividend or cap and invest kind of programs where they take some of the money from fossil fuel and use it to fund renewables. And all of that makes a lot of sense. At the federal level, if sanity ever regains a foothold in Washington, what we needed was what Biden provided. That Inflation Reduction Act was, pretty much on the line of where we need to go, subsidizing this transition so that we can get to the place where we have free electricity 3 hours every afternoon, Because if nothing else, Americans, especially of my age, owe an enormous climate debt to the rest of the planet. If you're 70 now, you've been alive to watch more than 80% of all the carbon that humans have ever produced be put into the atmosphere. And, it made your life conspicuously easier. Now it's making everybody, but especially poor people's lives, conspicuously harder. So we've got some work to do. Before
we go, obviously you have the book, Here Comes the Sun. We can find you on Substack. What's it called?
Yes, it's called The Crucial Years, and it's become the largest Substack about climate and energy because it's free.
Like I am a subscriber.
It's like that electricity in Australia, It turns out that free is a price that people enjoy paying. So,
yeah. Well, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.